Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the House Gaming Oversight Committee to order. Bob, if you'd please take the attendance.
Chairman Harkins,
Here.
Representative Carroll, Representative Tater Freites,
Leave.
Representative Donahue,
Leave.
Representative Doherty, Representative Friel, Representative Gallagher, Representative Terrell, here. Representative Guzman, Representative Harris, here. Representative McAndrew,
Leave.
Representative Mirsky, Representative Rusnot,
Leave.
Chairman Diamond,
Here.
Representative Benninghoff, Representative Fritz,
Here.
Representative Hogan, Representative Kephart, Representative Happy,
Leave.
Representative Costello,
Leave.
Representative Rossi,
Present.
Representative Rincavage,
Leave.
Representative Tomlinson, Representative Warner,
Leave.
Representative Williams,
Thanks, Bob. I would just like to point out we will have members coming and going. There are a number of other meetings taking place this morning, so just so people see, if people coming and going, they understand what's going on. The purpose of today's meeting is to learn about prediction.
Mr. Chairman, I could not hear Bob, but this is Representative Scott. I'm participating virtually.
Thank you, Representative Scott. The purpose of today's meeting is to learn about prediction markets and how they are infringing on Pennsylvania's gaming regulations. Prediction markets are websites where consumers can place a wager on practically anything. From election results to what movie will be named Best Picture, or even will a person say a particular word during a television interview. Recently, these websites have started to offer markets on the outcome of sporting events because they allege to be federally regulated by the Commodity Futures Trading. They have gotten around state laws on gaming. Today we have 3 speakers from the Gaming Control Board. I'd like to welcome Kevin O'Toole, the Executive Director, Steve Cook, Chief Counsel, and Cyrus Petrie, Chief Enforcement Counsel. We will also hear from Josh Urkel, Executive Director of the Council on Compulsive Gambling of PA, for his perspective on these markets. Also, the Department of Revenue and the PA Lottery have submitted testimony, which you can find in the meeting packets. At this time, Chairman Diamond, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate everybody coming to talk to us about this important issue, emerging issue today, and I predict that we will learn something today, and I predict that we will learn more later on about how we have to act, but I'm not willing to put any money on either of those predictions. So thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Diamond. Great interlude. With that, we will start with our guests from the Gaming Control Board.
Good morning, Chairman Harkins, Chairman Diamond, and members of the House Gaming Oversight Committee. Thank you for inviting the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board to appear before you today to deliver an assessment of the growing and highly problematic issue of unregulated prediction markets operating within the Commonwealth. We appreciate the gravity with which this committee approaches matters threatening the integrity of Pennsylvania's carefully constructed gaming ecosystem, and we are thankful to speak publicly on this issue. My name is Kevin O'Toole. I serve as the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. My role and that of the board is to ensure the robust integrity, financial stability, and public confidence in one of the most successful regulated gaming jurisdictions in the United States. With me is Steve Cook, our Chief Counsel, and Cyrus Petrie, our Chief Enforcement Counsel. Prediction markets or event contracts are, in their fundamental concept, a contemporary evolution of a very old tool. We readily acknowledge the historical and legitimate use of futures markets for commodities trading, a process designed for risk management, allowing producers, consumers, and businesses to hedge against the volatile future price of agricultural products, metals, and energy. However, the nature, scope, and scale of these new platforms have shifted dramatically, moving far beyond traditional commercially relevant hedging. Over the past 13 months, starting most notably with the high-stakes 2024 presidential and congressional election cycles, we have witnessed a vast and deeply concerning expansion into predicting political, current event, and even sports outcomes. These platforms, championed by operators like Kalshi and Polymarket, are essentially offering high-volume wagering mechanisms that operate entirely outside of Pennsylvania's comprehensive consumer protection, responsible gaming, and tax framework. This effectively creates a dual-track system where one track is highly regulated and the other is a legal Wild West. The board's position, consistent with the warnings we have delivered to federal authorities, in that these markets are deeply problematic for several critical reasons. I will now turn this over, my presentation, to Steve Cook, our Chief Counsel, to elaborate on the specific legal and regulatory dangers posed by this trend.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning. My testimony today addresses a critical jurisdictional failure that jeopardizes Pennsylvania's legislative framework. The PGCB's jurisdiction is rooted in the Pennsylvania Racehorse Development and Gaming Act and was significantly expanded by the sweeping amendments adopted via Act 42 of 2017. Our mandate is not merely administrative, it is a legislative charge to protect the public interest, strictly enforce the integrity of gaming operations, and ensure the financial benefits of this industry flow directly to the citizens of our state. I appear before you today because that specific legislative mandate and the sovereign ability of Pennsylvania to enforce same is currently being eroded by federal inaction. The federal government's Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or CFTC, has failed to enforce the Commodity Exchange Act's prohibition on futures trading in the area of gaming. This has created a regulatory vacuum. The silence of the CFTC has generated a loophole allowing financial technology platforms to provide our residents with what are essentially sports wagers without meeting the rigorous standards of Pennsylvania's Gaming Act. We're observing a form of regulatory arbitrage where federal preemption is stretched beyond its intended purpose to shield operators from state police powers. While my focus here today is on sports-related future contracts, given that the board regulates sports wagering, I must note that prediction markets regarding non-sporting outcomes, as the chairman alluded to, such as elections and pop culture events, are also widely available despite being illegal under Pennsylvania's crimes code. Many of these markets are susceptible to manipulation by even a single individual. For instance, on Kalshi, a large prediction market operator, one can wager on specific words a celebrity might utter during a late-night talk show appearance, or the date upon which a candidate may choose to drop out or drop his political campaign for public office. Notwithstanding my personal concerns in that area, however, as I stated, my primary purpose today is to discuss sports wagering via prediction markets because that directly impacts the PGCB's charge. Our statutory framework was carefully constructed following the Supreme Court's 2018 Murphy v. NCAA ruling, which confirmed that gaming and sports wagering policy decisions are rightfully made by state jurisdictions and that the federal government's attempt to restrict sports wagering through the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, or PASPA, was an improper use of federal authority to stop states from doing what was otherwise within its authority to do, legalize sports wagering. Following the passage of Act 42 of 2017 by this General Assembly and the Murphy decision, legalized sports betting came to Pennsylvania. And we did not merely open a market, we created one of the world's most rigorous, consumer-centric, and highly taxed regulatory environments. This system operates under the Commonwealth's police power, placing citizen health and welfare above commercial profits. Conversely, we now face a proliferation of prediction markets offering event contracts that mimic regulatory bets, such as moneyline bets, over-under bets, and spread betting, while claiming to be financial instruments. These platforms bypass the PGCB entirely, ignoring our comprehensive compliance framework, including know your customer checks, anti-money laundering protocols, and public health safeguards. This conflict is most dangerous regarding responsible gaming. In Pennsylvania, responsible gaming is a statutory requirement, not a voluntary corporate initiative. The PGCB's centralized self-exclusion program are the foundation of this protection. These state-managed, legally binding lists allow individuals to voluntarily ban themselves from all gaming in the Commonwealth. Enrollment is a definitive legal action. Operators are mandated to block individuals who have signed up for the list from gaming or face anything from heavy fines to loss of their gaming license. Furthermore, patrons violating self-exclusion are subject to criminal liability. In contrast, prediction markets under the CFTC are not integrated into the Pennsylvania self-exclusion program. This creates a disastrous gap in our safety net. A resident who has legally acknowledged a gambling problem and joined our exclusion list can simply use an app like Kalshi to trade on the very same sports outcome they are banned from betting on in the Commonwealth. This undermines the efficacy of the state's protection mechanisms. While federal platforms may offer voluntary opt-outs, they lack the statutory force, centralized enforcement, and cross-operator blocking capabilities of the PGCB system. By permitting operations outside this system, the federal government effectively nullifies the recovery efforts of Pennsylvanians. Indeed, one attorney representing the futures industry publicly dismissed concerns for those with addictions, stating, quote, "People are adults and they're allowed to spend their money however they want, and if they lose their shirts, that's on them," unquote. Additionally, I would be remiss if I did not also address statutory violations in Pennsylvania regarding age restrictions. The Pennsylvania General Assembly set a strict minimum age of 21 for sports wagering under the Gaming Act. However, prediction markets utilize federal frameworks to allow trading by participants as young as 18, often leaving age policies to an operator's discretion. This establishes a pipeline for high school and college students to engage in sports gambling disguised as financial products. As you all know, Pennsylvania hosts a vast university network, and our legislature intended to protect the demographic of people that attend that network. The board prohibits marketing targeted at college students or on college campuses. Despite this, a federal agency is now permitting activity that our state law deems criminal for this age group, overriding our determination of wagering maturity. And again, even though not something the board regulates, it is worth noting that these companies also open up wagering to teenagers with no interest in sports, with the ability to wager on the winners of the Grammy Awards, the Oscars, or a movie's Rotten Tomatoes review score. The economic impact of the Commonwealth is equally severe, undermining Act 42's funding structure. Pennsylvania applies an effective tax rate of 36% on sports wagering to ensure a public benefit. These funds are statutorily earmarked for critical public needs rather than general corporate profit. They fund property tax relief, economic development grants, and the Compulsive and Problem Gambling Treatment Fund. Currently, every dollar wagered on a federally regulated event contract yields zero tax revenue for the Commonwealth. This constitutes a direct wealth transfer from Pennsylvania Public Services to private entities, effectively defunding treatment programs for gambling addictions while profiting from the very citizens these programs are meant to protect. In the Commonwealth, these platforms act as free riders, benefiting from sports betting popularity that our regulated operators have grown without paying the societal costs required to operate here. While the CFTC, beginning earlier this year, has suggested that it is not incumbent upon them, but on the courts to define gaming, Pennsylvania cannot wait for litigation while our statutes are circumvented and our trust in our market erodes. These sports-based events contracts clearly meet the definition of sports wagering under the Gaming Act, and the PGCB asserts that they must be regulated to protect the health, safety, and fiscal interests of all Pennsylvanians. As a result, I believe it is incumbent upon all of us to lobby Congress and the CFTC to do the right thing and identify these products for what they are, sports wagering. In closing, I would note that despite the systemic problems that are rooted in this federal inaction, Pennsylvania is uniquely positioned to address at least the revenue component of this industry. When the General Assembly enacted Act 42 of 2017, it included a forward-looking provision that would appear to permit state taxation of sports-related future contracts accepted from within the Commonwealth, even if not authorized by the PGCB. While this provision was likely meant to address illegal bookmakers, it is my belief that it is equally applicable to companies offering sports-related prediction markets in Pennsylvania. This legislative foresight gives the Commonwealth a tangible basis for asserting a claim to tax revenue that many other states currently lack. We have entered into productive, ongoing discussions with both the Department of Revenue and the Office of Attorney General to explore the necessary legal and administrative mechanisms to pursue these revenues. While we wait for federal action in the futures commodity issue on futures trading, we could still obtain significant revenue from this for state programs from this funding were we to pursue it. I will now turn the testimony over to Cyrus Petrie, our Chief Enforcement Counsel, to discuss jurisdictional challenges he sees, as well as what's going on within our own industry.
Thank you, Steve. The most immediate roadblock to decisive action is jurisdictional. Our regulatory train is stalled at a crossing where federal and state tracks intersect. Major unregulated players such as Kalshi, Polymarket, and Crypto.com operate without PGCB licenses, placing them outside our direct authority. Their legal engine runs on the fuel of preemption, contending that their quote-unquote event contracts are financial derivatives governed solely by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission under the Commodity Exchange Act. We are actively engaged with the Attorney General to chart a course toward federal court in hopes of seeking a declaratory judgment on this precise preemption issue. Judicial clarity is essential to determine whether Pennsylvania's gaming laws, long considered a cornerstone of state sovereignty and reaffirmed in Murphy versus the NCAA, are truly overridden by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission's self-certification process for these so-called sports contracts. In the short term, we must recognize the legal turbulence. A pending Third Circuit Court of Appeals case out of New Jersey within our own federal circuit and with a similar regulatory backdrop is tackling the same Commodity Exchange Act preemption question. Its outcome will provide critical guidance, though the final whistle will ultimately be blown by the United States Supreme Court. Until then, prudence suggests waiting for the appellate clarity that may inform Pennsylvania's legal strategy and avoid burning state resources on premature litigation. Despite this legal fog, one beacon remains steady. As Steve stated, the Gaming Act provides a clear basis for taxing sports-related revenue earned by the Kalshis of the world for its sports wagering activity in Pennsylvania. This remains a key pillar of our collaboration with the Department of Revenue. As for our licensed operators, many of you may have seen their public announcements about exploring or entering prediction markets. I've been in constant dialogue with several Pennsylvania licensed casinos and operators considering national entry into this space. I have cautioned them that offering non-traditional prediction markets, whether sports or current events, within Pennsylvania would certainly jeopardize their gaming licenses. To date, all licensees have confirmed that they will not pursue such offerings in the Commonwealth, and given their compliance, I see no need for enforcement action at this time. Still, the threat looms large. These operators, with their multi-state footprint, argue that competitive necessity drives them to enter prediction markets elsewhere, especially in states where sports wagering has not been legalized. Their fear is that early entrants will lock in a dominant market share, which has historically proven true, much like the land rush of iGaming and sports wagering launches nationwide. They fear being left at the station while rivals speed ahead, especially since their unregulated competitors enjoy a cost advantage by sidestepping licensing fees and high tax obligations. Should any of our licensed operators choose to offer non-traditional prediction markets in Pennsylvania or to Pennsylvania consumers, I will evaluate an enforcement action based on the individual facts and the core regulatory principles that these products available to 18-year-olds without any of the consumer safeguards required of regulated gaming are fundamentally and demonstrably against the public interest. In doing so, my office must remain mindful of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's rulings in skill games. As many of the same legal questions echo here, if faced with such a scenario, we will not simply wave prediction markets through unchecked. Instead, we will investigate thoroughly, build a fact-based evidentiary record, and demonstrate why these products pose a unique and serious threat to the health, safety, and welfare of Pennsylvanians. I will now turn the floor back over to our Executive Director, Kevin O'Toole.
Thank you, Cyrus. To conclude, the board finds the rapid proliferation and unregulated operation of these prediction markets clearly troubling. They constitute a direct threat to the consumer protections we have worked diligently to establish and represent a significant potential loss of tax revenue that rightly belongs to the Commonwealth. We want to be unequivocally clear. We will continue to pursue all available legal and regulatory avenues to either bring them under Pennsylvania's rigorous regulatory umbrella, tax them, or exclude them entirely. Our commitment is reflected in our ongoing substantive discussions with the regulated community, the Department of Revenue, and the Office of Attorney General. Furthermore, we have taken action on the federal front. We have been in direct contact with and submitted detailed written comments to the CFTC, the entire Pennsylvania congressional delegation, and the U.S. House Committee on Agriculture. Given that the CFTC is directly under the oversight of the U.S. House Committee on Agriculture, we earnestly ask that you, the members of the Pennsylvania House Gaming Oversight Committee, or perhaps the committee as a whole, consider using your collective influence to reach out to the Congressional, House, and Senate Agricultural Committees. We are fortunate to have strong Pennsylvania representation there, including Senator Fetterman in the Senate and Representatives Thompson and Bresnahan in the House. Your strong, unified voice demanding decisive federal action or, at a minimum, immediate jurisdictional clarity would be the most impactful step you could take to support the board's efforts to protect Pennsylvania consumers and state revenue. Thank you again for your time, attention, and your partnership on this critical issue. We are now ready to take your questions.
Thank you for your testimony and your insight. Are there any questions from the members? Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank the panel for their testimony today. I just have one concern regarding prediction markets. The potential impact on the Pennsylvania lottery, especially when the funds are used for lottery's revenue to support senior programs. What information do you have regarding the effect, if any, prediction markets will likely have on the PA lottery as they continue to expand, if not regulated?
I don't know that we have any tangible evidence. Certainly, the more forms of gaming that are available, the money's got to come from somewhere. So it is quite possible that there'd be a negative impact upon lottery from the availability of these games, but we don't have any hard data to support that.
Also, do you have any data that states that people are turning more to sports betting and prediction markets and from your traditional lottery?
We don't have any hard data. This is all very new. It really has only come up at this calendar year. The Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs along with Penn State, does an annual report on the impact of the various forms of gaming, and the report for this year will be going out, and we've asked them, or we will be asking them in the next report to evaluate futures markets and take that under consideration when they issue their report. But again, this started like just about a year ago with the presidential and congressional races, and they got away with that basically, and then next thing was the Super Bowl, kind of got away with that, and then March Madness and the Masters golf tournament, and then the gloves were off, and now they're everywhere. But it's been too soon to get hard data, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thank you.
Representative Mirsky.
Thank you, Chairman. When we're looking at Polymarket in particular, or any of these betting sites, are they going through the commodities market because they're not using cash, they're using cryptocurrency? Is that the concept why they feel like they belong in that
No,
arena?
they are using cash.
They are using cash.
They are using cash. You can use cash or you can use crypto at some of the sites. So their whole thing is that these are contracts that people are purchasing. A contract, you would purchase a contract that the Eagles would beat the Buffalo Bills. And then you have another side that might purchase contracts saying Buffalo Bills will beat the Eagles. And so they are taking cash.
Okay, I've never used it, so I apologize. But I'm sure.
No, it's not a problem because this is all new to all of us, and we're still learning about a lot of different avenues that they take, and our sports wagering operators are starting to see on their end an impact with their clientele moving over to these markets. Our main concern with this, as Steve and Kevin both alluded to, that college campuses,
Yes.
18-year-olds, they're all allowed to do this.
Yes.
And we take a lot of time to insulate our college campuses from sports wagering. But now with the implementation of these prediction markets, it's out of our control.
Absolutely. To comment on that, and then I'll pass it on to my colleagues. I believe it was Carnegie Mellon University just started a class on online betting and the prediction markets and the study of this, because up to 70% of their male students have participated at least once in online wagering. And so this is, when you talk about the public interest and you talk about young people, I'm glad you're addressing that, so thank you.
Yeah, that's our biggest, well, it's my biggest concern. That along with, and we testified with regard to sweepstakes the last time we were here. Those things are having a big impact with our college students. And look, high school students, really, if they are bright, can get away with doing this. So because there's really no direct oversight of who's entering into any of these avenues.
The other thing to keep in mind, most of these contracts that Cyrus alluded to, you can buy for like $1. Like it goes in dollar increments. So, if you have $5, you could basically buy a contract on the outcome of a football game.
Representative Guzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your time this morning. As I was preparing for this hearing, I started to go down the rabbit hole of this over the last weekend, and I tell you, this rabbit hole is really deep, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen in this room. Just the last month, the CEO of Kalshi said the long-term, quote unquote, the long-term vision is to financialize everything and create a tradable asset out of any difference of opinion, end quote. And so I just want that to to sit in on our colleagues here on this committee, and just to think about that, to think about what that actually means, and that means turning every aspect of our life, whether it's elections, wars, natural disasters, celebrity pregnancy, into a casino game. And so this is obviously something that is very concerning to me. But on the flip side, I think we also have to be honest here in saying that, the traditional casino industry is warning us about all this, and rightfully so. However, as was stated earlier, a lot of these same traditional traditional casino industries are leaving the market. DraftKings, FanDuel, Fanatics, they all quit the American Gaming Association to form their own trade association so that they can launch their own prediction markets. And I know PGC just said that, they weren't going to launch here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but, anybody with a VPN could launch anywhere across the Commonwealth and play regardless of where they live and regardless of where DraftKings, FanDuels, or Fanatics host their servers or host their playing. And so, I have a big concern about integrity, quite frankly. We have documented cases of insider trading happening just this last December on Polymart. An individual trader correctly guessed 23 out of 24 of the Google search terms of 2024, earning $1 million in the process. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we are quickly entering into the end stage of degenerate gambling here in not just the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but the entire country. And so I have some questions in regards to what we can possibly do here as the General Assembly and what you all can do in the PGCB in terms of protecting Pennsylvania consumers, because obviously we recognize that this is a federal issue largely, but there has to be a way that we can protect Pennsylvania consumers, because right now Pennsylvania consumers, in my opinion, don't necessarily understand these prediction markets the same way they may understand traditional betting markets like DraftKings or betting at MGM casinos. And just for the simple fact of the matter is of the insider trading that can happen. As you said in your testimony, any one person can come in and, sway the odds one way or the other, and, Pennsylvania consumers are left holding the bag. And so I guess my question is in regards to, one, I have two questions. One is in regards to the self-exclusion gap, because obviously we know that is part of our law here and something that we hold very true to our gaming laws here and to our gaming institutions. And so my question to you all is, what happens when an individual who's on the self-exclusion list and goes on Kalshi and wins, or goes on Polymart and wins a wager, let's say on an Eagles game? Is that person potentially breaking the law?
I don't believe so, because they've self-excluded from Pennsylvania regulated operators. And this is basically, these futures markets are operating entirely outside.
So the individual consumer themselves will not have any liability if they were on the self-exclusion list and they were to go on to these platforms and bet?
I don't believe so, no.
No. So let's say that a self-excluded person wins money on that. Is there any mechanism for the Commonwealth to potentially retrieve some of that funds?
I don't think you'd be able to retrieve the winnings. Again, though, we do think there's a provision in the Gaming Act that would allow taxation of the operators that are like Kalshi and Polymarket that are operating in Pennsylvania. They can be treated. Futures markets on sports wagering that come from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it is my belief, can be taxed just like legitimate regulated operators. And that's where we're in discussions with the Department of Revenue and Office of Attorney General about doing that. So the people on the self-excluded list or not, if they buy a futures contract and they win or lose, there's nothing we can do about it. We can tax, at least, I believe, tax the sports wagers that are placed on these futures markets out of the Commonwealth.
Interesting concept, and of course something that I hope that we can continue to explore. I'll promise this is my last question, Mr. Chairman, and I'll wrap up here. But I know that we spoke about the emergence of 18-year-olds, and quite frankly, I got exposed to gambling even lower, younger than that. I got exposed to gambling on Counter-Strike, playing on stream games. So there's gambling happening even outside of what we're even talking about here today. But in terms of the outreach to young individuals, whether in college or even younger, And I know in your testimony, you talked about there being a dramatic increase in the amount of individuals who have called the helpline. Have those individuals, or do you have any breakdown of individuals that have specifically mentioned either Kalshi or Polymart or any of these other prediction markets when they're calling our hotlines?
I personally don't have that information. I believe our next witness may have something to that effect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we are seeking jurisdictional authority and we don't get that assistance from the federal government, can we achieve it here at the Pennsylvania state level?
I don't believe so. I mean, the entire issue here is preemption, and that's what's being litigated in these various courts. There's not a Pennsylvania, United States District Court in Pennsylvania that has yet made a decision on this issue. But as Cyrus alluded to, New Jersey, there's a case pending outcome in the U.S. District or U.S. Circuit Court for the Third Circuit out of New Jersey. Pennsylvania is part of the Third Circuit. So that decision, which is preliminary in nature, but whatever that decision says will be binding in Pennsylvania as well, and it may give us further guidance as to how we can treat these operators in Pennsylvania. But as of right now, we don't have any direct federal decisions one way or the other.
Do we have a timeline when we may see that decision?
It was argued like 3 months ago, maybe. So from tomorrow until, a year from now, who knows?
Okay, thank you.
Representative Harris.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you for your testimony. Well, we all know that the whole gambling industry has spawned out of illegalities. The whole industry, right? It spawned out of that. So now we have these players outside of the regulations, right? So are your arguments about more of is an infringement on the public coffers that provide the services for our citizens, or is or it infringes on your profits?
I think it's both. I mean, personally, I'm more concerned about, as Cyrus alluded to, and I think we agree on this, and Kevin as well, that the number of young people that are just getting drawn into this is scary. And we're here to talk about sports wagering because in the regulated space, that's what we regulate. But it is very disconcerting to me personally that you can place wagers on the Academy Awards or the Grammys or whatever you want in the pop genre culture, whether Taylor Swift is going to be pregnant in the next 9 months. You could actually place a wager on that. So that is a whole new market of 18-year-olds that don't care about sports. Yes. And these are the wagers that really are very risky because they may or may not be controlled by one person who could themselves. There's no guardrails for insider trading here. Yeah. So, somebody could financially benefit from an outcome that they control.
And that's what my concern would be, because the scams outside of the regulations, like you said, and people can rig the system, or rig a machine, and that's what the concerns I really think that we need to really look at. Thank you.
Chairman Diamond.
Thank you so much for your testimony today. And to your last point, and Representative Harris's last point, I heard a report on this market on NPR, and they were talking about, I don't know if it was Joe Rogan or some famous podcaster, who at the end of his podcast simply went down a list of words that clearly people were putting contracts on whether he would say in this particular podcast. So that's the kind of insider gaming the system that we're concerned about, because our compelling interest here in the Commonwealth is consumer protection. That's our compelling interest. I do want to back up to something you mentioned in your testimony, and it's related to sports wagering, because in my mind, it's like, okay, we regulate sports wagering. And if somebody comes in and is not licensed and is doing sports wagering, in effect, why can't we just send our Attorney General after them or our Department of Revenue after them? And I wanted to touch on something you mentioned was under the CFTC, the self-certification. Are you telling me that I could set up a company today that's going to be doing this prediction market stuff, and I just go and self-certify to the federal government that I'm doing financial instruments rather than wagers? Is that what you meant by self-certification?
If you have been okayed to offer prediction market contracts, then any contract you offer, you can self-certify in saying that my contract complies with the federal regulation. And that's all you need to do. There's no check unless the CFTC decides, well, we're going to check to see if it does. There was, I forget what month it was, that the CFTC, that we're going to go testify, and the CFTC was going to take up that issue, and then they canceled the meeting.
It was April.
It was April. Okay. So, and gaming is specifically in the code, in the federal regulations. Gaming is excluded,
Right.
from being a part of prediction markets, but because these companies have self-certified that this is okay and this is not gaming, then until a court says otherwise, that no, this is gaming, they're allowed to continue doing it, or until the CFTC says, no, you can't do this because this is gaming.
Okay, so just to clarify, our licensees here in Pennsylvania go through a rigorous kind of background check, all sorts of investigations before they're issued a license, as opposed to these outfits which don't go through the same sort of rigorous background check and then can self-certify.
It would
Yes
be,
or no?
Yes and no.
Okay, thank you.
It would be the equivalent of us giving, once we give somebody a license, then they can say, okay, well, we offer whatever game we want to offer.
Okay.
And PGCB, we're self-certifying that it complies with your regulations without us testing any of the games,
Okay.
without us saying any of the games were okay.
Okay,
So that's what's going on.
I understand now, and that's still problematic. But which leads to my second question. You had mentioned about licensees, Pennsylvania licensees who are toying with getting into these markets, or maybe they have. It's if a licensee, a Pennsylvania licensee, is entering these markets in another state, will that impact that licensee's ability to retain their Pennsylvania license?
What I've told them is that they need to move forward cautiously. If anything comes out and says that, hey, what you're doing is illegal, then that's going to affect your suitability in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
If I find out that they're offering it in Pennsylvania, then all bets are off. Any license you have is on the table.
Okay.
So everything impacts their suitability, and they know that going forward.
Okay.
So if they're in Tennessee, or I know we have some, Hawaii was one of the markets, and Texas. If Texas comes out and says, hey, you're offering illegal gambling, we're going to file criminal charges against you. And if they're successful with those criminal charges, then that impacts their suitability here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, because our licensees have geofencing and all sorts of things to make sure that somebody's actually in Pennsylvania.
Correct.
And is completely under the jurisdiction of the Gaming Control Board, as opposed to someone who's hosting a server either internationally or out of state and is, having Pennsylvanians play their game. That's two different things, right?
If someone is in Pennsylvania and I find out that one of our licensees is allowing them to enter into prediction markets from a platform in Texas, then that's going to affect their license here.
Thank you. That's a strong statement, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Diamond. Next, we will hear from Josh Urkel, the Executive Director of the Council on Compulsive Gambling of PA.
Good morning, Chairman Harkins, Chairman Diamond, and the rest of the members of the House Gaming Oversight Committee. In advance, I'd like to thank you for inviting the Council on Compulsive Gambling of Pennsylvania to once again address the committee regarding this important topic of prediction markets, which is a topic that does require immediate attention. I would like to just state that a lot of my testimony is going to mirror a lot of what you just heard from my colleagues at the Gaming Control Board, and I hope that I can maybe shed some light on some other areas that kind of focus more on our concerns. The core purpose of the testimony is to shed light on what prediction markets are and how they work, to discuss some of their functional similarities to wagering, similar to what you just heard, but also to share some of the challenges that they may pose, not just from a regulatory perspective, but from the customer protection landscape that we have here in Pennsylvania. A prediction market, if you aren't already aware from the conversation or from your own research, is an exchange-traded market where individuals can trade contracts. And they are often referred to as event contracts, as my colleagues just mentioned. And these contracts, in their simplest and most popular forms, are very simple yes or no decisions. They're contracts that are purchased based on predicted outcomes of unknown future events. And while these events may include things like the prediction of political elections or Bitcoin value or weather events or public health occurrences or pop culture events or anything like that, in the United States, what we found is that event contracts are most often tied to predicting the outcome of sporting events. And while prediction markets and state-regulated sports wagering may differ from a legal standpoint, functionally, they are often indistinguishable to the player based on how they operate. Contracts are often, and this is where I'll get a little bit into just how they operate, and please, after the testimony concludes, if you have questions about this, I'm happy to elaborate. The contracts are often priced between a penny and a dollar. And this reflects market assigned probabilities in most cases. And based on what a buyer, I'll refer to them as, based on what a buyer chooses or predicts, several different outcomes may occur. So if an individual decides to buy a yes position on something that's presented to them, and they choose to buy 100 contracts that are valued at 25 cents each, what this represents is that there's a 25% chance of that outcome happening. If that is exactly what happens, if that outcome is what happens as predicted, then that matches what the buyer predicted, and they would ultimately win. They would receive $1 for each of the contracts, which ultimately means that they would be making 75 cents per contract. So in other words, a $100 investment or a $100 return would be what they would gain on a $25 investment in that situation. If they bought the no position on 100 contracts valued at 75 cents each, same thing would happen. This is a 75% chance that the outcome would not happen. And if that outcome of the event that they just predicted did not happen, then that would be successful again, and they would again receive $1 for each contract, ultimately now making 25 cents per contract profit. So here we have a $100 return on a $75 investment. But if the prediction is wrong, and if it does not match what the outcome of the event ultimately is, then that contract would be considered to expire worthless. And this results in the player losing that investment, much like losing a sports wager. So like the stock market, the price of the contract will fluctuate based on a number of different real-time events, things like supply and demand and the collective belief of involved participants. So when we look at similarities between prediction markets and sports betting, obviously there are several, as I just outlined. The fundamental similarity here is that the participants in both activities are attempting to forecast the outcome of an uncertain future event. And in both situations, participants are putting real money at risk with the goal of a potential financial return. Correct predictions can lead to profits, just like accurately placed wagers in a sports book, but incorrect predictions result in the loss of the initial stake or the investment. just like in sports wagering losses. Additionally, both platforms do see prices and odds shift in response to the volume and the beliefs of people who are purchasing the contracts or placing sports wagers, depending on what we're looking at. Share prices in contracts and odds in sports wagers, which are two separate things, but we're looking at them similarly now, they both directly reflect the perceived probability of an outcome of an event, and they're both guided by participation as well as by volume. And in keeping up with technology and the desire for instant gratification that's often present, both prediction markets and sports books are accessible via online platforms and mobile apps, making it incredibly, incredibly convenient for users to participate in. And just like sports betting, prediction markets offer the opportunity to make predictions on a variety of different outcomes, including both individual as well as season-long sporting events, but also on individual player performance. As for differences, yes, a primary one is that with traditional sports books, players bet against the house. And this may shed some light on earlier discussion. The house traditionally has a built-in edge, which is often referred to as the VIG, a term that you may be familiar with. In prediction markets, things are a little bit different. This is a peer-to-peer model that's being used. And with this peer-to-peer model, players are actually trading with each other, similar to what you would see in a stock market situation. And the platforms generally make their money through fees that are assessed on each contract. So maybe a penny or two on each contract is how they would then generate their revenue. So it's a little bit different in terms of how the house advantage applies in sports wagering to what we see with prediction markets. Another obvious key difference has to do with regulation. Following the 2018 overturning of the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, states were then able to determine whether sports betting should or shouldn't be allowed within their jurisdiction. And since then, 38 states, including Pennsylvania, have passed legislation to allow regulated and legal sports wagering. But most prediction platforms argue that the event contracts that they offer are not bets, but financial instruments, as we talked about earlier, and this allows them to seek that federal oversight from the CFTC. And this has largely paved the way for them to operate in all states across the United States with virtually no state involvement or oversight. And while this all creates challenges in terms of state revenue and taxation, not to mention the integrity involved in monitoring a lot of these athletic events and contests and performance, the council's main concern falls back on customer protections and resources that are available. So as you may recall, the council, we are the recognized Pennsylvania affiliate of the National Council on Problem Gambling, and we've served as an advocacy group in Pennsylvania for over 40 years now, addressing the needs of individuals and family members of individuals, of citizens in Pennsylvania who are affected by gambling-related harms or problems. And we remain neutral when it comes to gambling. We don't support or oppose legislation to allow for it. We don't say it's a good thing or a bad thing or that people should or shouldn't participate in it. But rather, our mission is to advocate for the development and the expansion of comprehensive policies and programs that can help provide either preventive or treatment-based help to the hundreds of thousands of Pennsylvanians whose lives are negatively impacted by problems related to gambling. And we encourage the committee to continue exploring prediction markets and to consider the negative impact that they may have ultimately on some individuals across the Commonwealth. Unlike Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board licensed operators, these platforms are not required to provide the robust number of consumer protection tools that are mandated by state legislation. They lack vital resources like direct links to the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline, or to tools like voluntary self-exclusion, or any of the self-imposed tools like limit setting for deposits and time. And additionally, because they're identified as financial instruments, the minimum age requirement to participate is often 18, as was illustrated by my colleagues. And this circumvents Pennsylvania's established minimum age of 21 for sports wagering. This exposes, and we agree completely with this, that this exposes a highly vulnerable demographic to an activity that has inherent risks associated with it. And over the past several years, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of younger folks contacting the helpline. I apologize not having it in my testimony. We just received numbers late last night. This month, prior, November, is the first month that at the helpline, our highest call demographic was 18 to 24-year-olds. Traditionally, we never saw numbers that high from that group. It was always 35 to 45, 45 and up. Now we are in a completely different world. We've had consistently since 2021, coming out of COVID, the highest call volume come from folks within the 25 to 35 range, and now we're seeing that age go even lower. So we share in the board's concern that younger folks being impacted by this is significantly important to pay attention to. Over the past several decades, and the blurred lines, and this is an important component as well, the blurred lines that continue to exist across the country with the partnerships that we're seeing being formed between prediction market companies as well as licensed regulated sports betting operators will only continue to create confusion. Quite frankly, confusion that is going to likely encourage risk-taking behavior in some individuals. And because of the lack of state regulations that we see across the country, prediction market operators are not required to make any financial contribution to funds that support programs. In Pennsylvania, that fund, the Compulsive and Problem Gambling Treatment Fund, that is a fund that is designed to help prevent and treat problems. And if there is no money going into that, not only does that unfairly put the burden on the gaming industry that is taxed, but it also puts a burden on that fund to match the needs of the citizens of Pennsylvania who are seeking resources. Over the past several decades, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has been an absolute leader in addressing problem gambling across the country. And the treatment and prevention efforts from groups like the Department of Drug and Alcohol programs and their providers, both prevention and treatment, the regulatory efforts of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board, the responsible gambling efforts of the Pennsylvania Lottery, the research that's conducted by Penn State University, and the work that we, on behalf of our members and our board, do at the council. It's all resulted in a wide network of available tools and resources. But that is just part of it. Problems still exist, and the challenges are still there. So having conversations like this and the chance to present to all of you, we truly appreciate it, and it is incredibly important. So this concludes our testimony at this point. I'd like to once again thank you all for inviting us to participate. It's always a pleasure, and if time permits, I'd be happy to answer any questions or hear any comments that any of the committee members may have for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh, for your testimony. It's always very compelling. First question would be Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony today. So you mentioned the 18 to 24 demographic as being the highest call-in rate, but to help me understand that, give me an actual number. In a month's time, how many of these individuals call into the gambling helpline?
So that number last month was 50 18 to 24-year-olds. And that was, again, a broken down demographic rate of I think last month we received the highest call volume ever on record. That was a total of just under 300 calls. I forget the exact number, 297 or 298. And of those, that significant percentage of that small piece of the overall demographic is what was represented by 18 to 24-year-olds.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
Josh, we thank you for your testimony. Always appreciate you coming.
Thank
Great
you very
insight
much.
into
My
things.
pleasure. Thank you.
With that said, I'd like to once again thank all the testifiers for their participation today. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.